Once again, thank you so much for everybody who's taken time out on a Friday afternoon to join us. We have our guest speaker, Mr. Blair Crichton, and he's the co-founder at KARANA, obviously. And, Blair was one of the founders of first brands in Asia for the plant-based meats. And Blair is obviously very passionate about revolutionizing the global food system. And I had sent you a bunch of details in the email about what KARANA does, the recent round they had raised. And obviously Blair has been working towards making this happen for past few years. He's worked a lot on, aggregating the supply chain, studying the supply chain of various agriculture commodities, especially jackfruit. And KARANA's first product is going to launch soon in 2020. It's going to be a whole plant-based pork. And they are also going to expand in 2021 in many other sources. Prior to KARANA, Blair worked for Impossible Foods, New Age Meats, and the Good Food Institute in Silicon Valley. And we can see Blair is also sporting a JFI t-shirt today. So I'm really, really glad. Blair was born and raised in Hong Kong, which he still considers his home, but he's currently staying in Singapore. And his background is in Cantonese and Mandarin studies and holds an MPhil in Chinese studies from Cambridge. We are very, very excited to have Blair today. Joining Blair in the Q&A session and this chat is also Varun Deshpande, the Managing Director at the Good Food Institute India, like a lot of you already know. So I'm going to let Varun take it up from here. He's going to quickly introduce you to what we are planning to do today, and then Blair is going to give you a quick presentation. And after that, we are going to open it up for a Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Shardul. I'm not going to spend too much further time on Preamble because you gave an excellent introduction of the community. What I'm going to do really quickly is just share a couple of slides before Blair gets started so we understand what it is that we're talking about, and particularly give you a perspective of how Indians are thinking about meat substitutes, if indeed Indians are thinking about meat substitutes. What you can see on the screen here is part of a number of surveys that we've done before. And I'm sorry that I can't make the text a little bit larger right now. We'll have a lot of materials coming out about this. So I don't think you need to worry about the broader context here, but we evaluated the early adopter set for plant-based meats and why Indians are eating what they're eating currently. And what we learned is something we've said before to all of you, which is that there is a large cohort of people in India that eats like our global counterparts, that eats like Blair's neighbors in Singapore, right? Or in Hong Kong, or in Sydney, London, New York, etc. People who might have slightly higher disposable income, people who might have, perhaps may have been westernized to a certain extent, people who might have, for example, a Spotify premium account, right? The idea here is there is a cohort of people in India that looks like the early adopter cohort, the flexitarian cohort that is eating plant-based meat substitutes everywhere, right? And some of the reasons that they talk about for wanting to eat plant-based meats is that they don't want to give up the taste of meat. So just to underline, this is the central premise of our entire sector, which is plant-based meat companies would like to provide people with something that satisfies the taste as well as hopefully the cost of meat so that it feels like a simple switch and not a sacrifice. This seems to be true in India as well, that it will drive consumption here. And as we're seeing a lot of interesting news coming out, entering the space, I'm sure you've been following the news about different people entering the space. That's what the early companies that succeed, we predict, will focus on. And that will succeed in general, will focus on. But there are different approaches to doing this, obviously. I'm sorry again that I cannot make this a little bit larger, but this is a plant-based meat product mind map, right? So just a way of thinking about the different products and the categories of foods that might emerge in the plant-based food landscape. At the bottom, the orange section is products that are not similar to meat. So they cannot be called plant-based meats because they are not similar to meat. Things like tofu, tempeh, veggie burgers, things that perhaps have existed for a very long time as well. And we do think that those have their own bright future, but that's not what we are talking about, right? On the left, there's functional meats, things like textured vegetable proteins, perhaps things that have existed for some time as well, like your soya nuggets, but those are getting better over time. But even those are not complete plant-based meats. I don't think anyone would eat a soya nugget and say, this is a plant-based meat product. It satisfies my craving for meat, which is what the previous slide says. Then, of course, there are products that are similar to meat, people who've done a lot of work, a lot of research, put in millions upon millions, dozens of millions of dollars, Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, etc. Those are the people, yeah, thank you, Shargul. The people to the right here, those are the people that have created products that taste exactly like meat. And 90% of their customers are meat eaters. That's what Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat say, right? So when people go into Burger King and try an Impossible Whopper, or when they go to Starbucks in Singapore and they try an Impossible rendang pie, what they are doing is they want to eat a beef burger. They want to eat a rendang pie that tastes like meat, right? But there's a fourth category here, and this is really where KARANA is coming into play and shining, which is nature's mimics of meat, right? You'll see up top there in the dark green section that we do have jackfruit in there, right? Now, I'll leave it to Blair to talk about what it is that they're doing specifically, but what we think needs to happen and what the market is telling us, what all the consumer research, what all the market research is telling us, is that you need to blend these ideas, these natural mimics of meat, the mushrooms, the jackfruit that have the inherent fibrous texture and the structure of meat, with satisfying that need for meat eating. So if you gave someone a traditional heritage jackfruit curry or a kathal, yeah, they might say it's a very tasty thing to eat, but I don't think many of them would say this tastes exactly like meat, like I couldn't tell the difference. And I think that's where a company like KARANA comes in, and what they're doing in terms of next generation products that are blending heritage, but bringing them ever closer to what consumers want to eat. So I'll stop there, and I will ask Blair to present his slides. And I will also say, Blair, that is a fantastic t-shirt. So thank you for wearing it.
Okay. So thanks for the introduction, guys. So, you know, I'm not going to spend too long going through a presentation because I discussed with Varun, and I thought this would be much better as an interactive discussion. And I think Varun's got some questions for me, so ready for those. But I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about KARANA and what we're doing and how we are approaching, you know, these sort of natural alternatives to meat. So, you know, central to what KARANA does is we're a whole plant-based food brand, and we are reinventing iconic Asian dishes to be, you know, still great tasting, but also healthier and more sustainable. And so we create iconic comfort foods from whole plants, essentially. So, you know, in this photo here, you can see, you know, some of the dishes that we've done with our products, from you know, dumplings, or I guess in India you would call them momos, right? To sanchoy dal, fried noodles, and so on. So, you know, just very high level why we're doing this is that, you know, we're based in a region that has a number of issues and a population of over 2 billion people that are facing things like a massive increase in demand for meat and seafood, combined with dietary related health issues and macro factors like swine flu and now coronavirus putting huge pressures on food security. And this is leading to consumers looking for healthier and more transparent food options, but they don't want to sacrifice on taste and experience. And, you know, they also want things that they are familiar with. So our solution is to create the first Asian whole plant-based food brand. And instead of turning to, you know, those commodity crops like soy, pea, and wheat that many of the other brands are using, like Varun sort of spoke about in his introduction, we are actually looking to natural ingredients that mimic meat in their natural form, and then looking at how we can enhance and improve those to create great tasting products. And this gives consumers that transparency and that health that they're looking for, but it also enables us to create great tasting products, like the char siu bao that you see in this photo. And in fact, sort of when we test this with the consumers, 8 out of 10 consumers think that that's made with meat, but it offers all the benefits of having a whole plant ingredient. And so we're, you know, the first ingredient that we're working with is jackfruit. which I'm sure many of you on this call are very familiar with, considering that I'm speaking to a largely South Asian audience. So, you know, jackfruit is an amazing ingredient. It's very sustainable and it has a naturally meat-like texture. But we've taken that jackfruit and we've elevated it through our proprietary processing method to create a pork from whole plants. And we're starting with pork because it's the #1 meat consumed in Asia. And if we're really going to move the needle, we need to give consumers products that they actually use and consume. So, you know, whilst there is definitely space in the market for some of the Western products like Impossible and Beyond, they are at the core beef products, and beef is not the most consumed meat in this region. It's pork and chicken and seafood. And I think, you know, that very much applies in India as well. I mean, beef is even lower down the totem. So, you know, for us, core to what we're doing is really trying to play to local tastes and demands. And to that extent, we're also taking the pork that we create to make indulgent plant-based dumplings and baos. And we will then expand beyond that to other ready-to-cook and ready-to-eat Asian products. But we're starting with dumplings and baos because it's a product that's ubiquitous across the region. It's something that is used in many cuisines, lots across a lot of different cultures. And, you know, I mean, sometimes I like, when I'm speaking to people in the US, I like to kind of say it's like the chicken nugget of Asia Pacific. You know, if you can get people eating more plant-based dumplings, you will be having a big dent. So, you know, really what we're doing is trying to take our pork and present it in more convenient and familiar formats to make it easier for consumers to eat. So a little bit of how we get here. So obviously, we're not the first people to ever have used jackfruit as a meat replacement. In fact, you know, it's, as you all know, it's been used in India for a long time and in other parts of the region as a meat replacement. But what we found to date is that many of the products that are out there don't quite give that experience and that satisfaction that people get from eating meat, as Varun was saying in his introduction. So we've really gone deep into the supply chain and kind of thrown out the window the traditional way jackfruit is used and processed and developed our own proprietary processing technology that elevates the texture and really uses it in a whole new way, enables us to deliver an ingredient that both has a wonderful texture, but it also is easy to use in the kitchen. And we've always designed it with chefs in mind, and they've made it so that it's a kind of a foolproof and easy to use ingredient that also gives consumers that transparency and health that they're looking for. So I'm going to stop there and, you know, open it up to discussion, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a background of where we're coming from and who we are. One thing I would say is, you know, we're not just a jackfruit company, so we are looking at other amazing ingredients that exist across this region that we can leverage and tell a similar story around and do similar things with. And that will enable us to, you know, expand our product offering beyond just pork and really grow our company.
Thank you so much, Blair. I remember speaking with Dan, who is Blair's co-founder, when Dan was first, well, not first visiting, but definitely on one of his visits to Sri Lanka to scope out the jackfruit supply chain. And this was a couple of years ago, and I think a lot has changed since then. As Shardul mentioned, KARANA just announced the close of a $1.7 million round of funding. And I do think it's very exciting because the value proposition that you're bringing to the table, Blair, is quite unique, as I've told you many times in the past, because of the whole plant-based offering here. It does raise the question of culinary approaches versus hardcore food science and technology approaches, and whether that is in fact a binary choice, right? So one of the things that keeps coming up is either you use like interesting kitchen processing techniques like curing or you use industrial food science and technology techniques in order to process products and make them, bring out certain tastes and bring out certain functionalities. Do you see these things as being two distinct ends of a spectrum? And how are you approaching those things at KARANA? This is one of the questions that is actually coming through in the Q&A as well, by the way.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't see them as mutually exclusive, but as a company, the way we think about it is that there is a clear consumer demand for less processed products and products that are more transparent and have that whole plant story. And so, we leverage food science a lot, but we do it in a way where we retain the integrity of the ingredient from the whole plant, minimally processed perspective. So our chief science officer has a PhD in food chemistry, and he's still applying that knowledge of food chemistry in our processing steps and looking at how, certain cooking methods or certain steps, whether it be, curing or whatever it might be, affect the chemical makeup and structure of the ingredient and what that will do to the texture, but in a way that is, I think consumers can relate to, and it doesn't involve us, using heavy chemicals or denaturing the product, stripping out the flavor, and so on and so forth, which does need to be done for certain other ingredients or products. And we're, as a company, we don't take a position and say that's bad, that's good. It's more about giving consumers choice. And, as you said in the introduction, I used to work for Impossible Foods. I love their product. It's amazing. But I don't want to eat an Impossible burger every day. And so it's really about having that choice and variety. And ultimately, if our movement is to be successful, we need variety and we need to give consumers more choice. With the way we think about it is we start with nature as a base, and that, gives us, 80% of what we need to do. And then we use food science and technology for that final mile. So it's that 80-20 kind of thing. And we are not scared of new technologies. In fact, we've got a number of research partnerships where we are looking at, this is much further down the line, how we could leverage, say, cell-based fats and blend that with whole plant ingredients to really elevate the products and take them to the next level, whether it be from a nutritional or from a flavor and taste perspective. But one thing we do want to avoid, just because it's our product proposition, is the very heavily processed, denatured ingredients.
Got it. Yeah, and it's a great point. I'm so glad you raised that last point about cell-based cultivated fats that are grown from cells and possibly how they could interact with whole plant ingredients and give you the blend of texture plus mouthfeel that people might be craving in an animal meat product, but they want to eat a very sustainable version of it. So let's talk about that, Blair. Let's park it there and talk about that for a little bit, because I think some questions that are coming in are about the jackfruit itself. And I do want to move on to other ingredients and your exciting new plans, but let's talk about the jackfruit. So it has this inherent sweet taste, and we know that generally plant ingredients don't always have that mouthfeel, that creamy mouthfeel that you're craving, right? This is something that we've discussed perhaps for plant-based protein shakes currently. They don't have the creamy mouthfeel of a whey protein, which is some of the reasons that people might choose whey over plant-based currently. So what kind of work have you done? You mentioned food science, your CSO has a PhD in food chemistry, and generally what kind of food science parameters do you keep in mind? What kind of things have you done, to the extent that you can reveal, that bring out those aspects, either in terms of sourcing the jackfruit or in terms of how you bring it through to the plate?
Yeah, I mean, I can't reveal too much, unfortunately, but we are always evaluating from a sensory perspective. What is it that we can do? And one very obvious thing is, I mean, this applies to all plants, right? They're not high in fat. Well, maybe some are. I mean, avocado, but like inherently, they don't have that juicy fattiness that meat will give you. And so, for us, that's something that we have focused on from a food science perspective. How do we incorporate some fat into the jackfruit to give it some of that mouthfeel that you expect when you're eating pork? I mean, we still say, when we talk to chefs, we'll still describe our product as a lean pork, as like a lean pork loin. It's not a high fatty pork, but we have imparted some of that fattiness that pork gives. So, to your question around, what parameters do we think about? It's really about that whole sensory experience. So texture is a huge part of it. And so a lot of what we were focused on was the texture, because I mean, I'm sure many in this group have tried, a traditional jackfruit-based curry or stew, where it's cooked for hours, and it has a nice texture, but it's not necessarily meaty. You don't get that chew and that bounce and the bite you get when you're eating, a shredded pork, for example. And so, that's really why we kind of went back and re-examined, how do we process this? How do we get it to that point where we have that texture? Because it already looks like it. It looks visually very meaty naturally. And so that's, where we have focused on are those sensory elements that make people have a great experience and make them feel like they're not compromising. And then the final piece is flavor as well. So you mentioned, jackfruit has a fruity flavor. I mean, we use unripe jackfruit, which does have a very mild fruity flavor, but it is very, very mild. It's actually quite a neutral flavor, but we still want to give that umami experience, that flavor experience. And so that's another thing we have focused on through development of our products, is how do we impart that, but using natural flavors rather than synthetic flavors. So that's, I think it really all comes down to sensory experience, and that's what what we're laser focused on, because if taste isn't good, consumers won't buy it. That's the reality.
Yep, totally agreed. So speaking of consumers, a couple of questions are coming in, and this is a natural question to ask about protein content. Some consumers are seeking protein when they eat meat, right? Like that's one of the things that they're thinking about as part of the whole package of meat. Granted, research says basically that that's a small percentage of consumers, and most consumers are eating it for the taste. But how are you thinking about the protein content relative to meat, and whether this is a shortcoming with jackfruit?
Yeah, so it's a question we get asked a lot. So I'm well versed in responding to this. Jackfruit, you're right, is not high in protein. There is some protein, but it's not high in protein. And one thing I would say is, at least for our initial launch markets, we actually don't see this as a massive issue, because most consumers in the markets and segments we're looking at are not protein deficient. In fact, a lot of consumers consume too much protein, and this is particularly becoming an issue in Asia, where there are high incidences of diabetes, and increasingly research is coming out that indicate high protein diets have a negative impact on diabetes and GI control. So from that perspective, we see that consumers are actually deficient in other macronutrients and things like fiber. And that's one thing that jackfruit offers, is it's got a great macronutrient profile and it is high fiber. So it's really about how we position that and communicate that to the consumers. And also, if we think about the products we're developing, dumplings and baos, people who are looking for high protein content typically aren't eating a dumpling and a bao. They're going to go and eat, have a protein shake or eat a steak, something like that. And so, that's more focused on experience. That being said, I mean, we do want to be nutritionally balanced, and we are considering in some of our products, as we develop, additional ready to cook meals or whatever it might be, how we can blend in some whole plant forms of protein. What we want to avoid is, things like protein isolates. which don't sit at the core of what our product offering is, which is the minimally processed, more natural approach. So if we started to use those protein isolates that have, often gone through a chemical extrusion and sorry, I'm not technical, so I'm forgetting the right word, but like fractionation or something. That basically doesn't sit with what where our proposition is. So to that extent, we won't go there. So that I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I think it's about promoting a varied diet, and if people have a varied diet, they should get enough protein.
Yeah, that's the way that I think about it is, I mean, look, we obviously work very closely with companies like Beyond Meat and Possible Foods. We do think that, they're a core piece of what's going to happen. And Blair, you mentioned earlier as well. It's important to remember that this is a 4 trillion or 6 trillion or $7 trillion industry, depending on how you count the size of seafood, which is the global meat and seafood industry. And so we need all approaches in order to satisfy different types of consumers, and in fact the same type of consumer on different occasions, right? Like Blair said, for lunch I might want an Impossible burger, for dinner I might want some dumplings from KARANA, right? It really depends on what I'm in the mood for, what I want to eat, and as long as things are being kept in balance, I think it makes a lot of sense. Some people are asking questions about micronutrients and things like that, but I think we know that whole plant ingredients tend to be quite, generally quite high in micronutrients. Do you want to say a couple of things about the micronutrient content of jackfruit, or should we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I can very quickly just say, it's got a great micronutrient profile. Obviously, it depends, how the product is used, because, some things, when something is cooked at high heat, vitamin C is very heat fragile, so that won't be there. So for our products, it will vary depending on how the product was made and processed and so on. But, it's high fiber, it's got magnesium, potassium, vitamins, it's low GI, obviously low calorie, low cholesterol. So there's a lot of benefits to it that play into many dietary concerns that consumers have. Okay,
Blair, let's talk supply chain, because to me, this is the most fascinating piece of this, and this is the piece that I always ask you about. Firstly, we have a question in the Q&A that says, and I want to put you on the spot with this. The question says, what is the reason that you are sourcing jackfruit from Sri Lanka rather than India, considering we are the largest producer? Let me put a pin in that for a second. There have been some really fascinating projects and pieces of work done in India, right, on the jackfruit. So I think we've talked about, for example, in the northeastern state of Meghalaya, something like 80,000 farmers have been aggregated by the chief minister of that state under what they're calling Mission Jackfruit, because there's such a huge amount of jackfruit that's just thrown away as a waste crop. And a lot of those farmers were experiencing things like elephants encroaching on their land to eat jackfruit. And so what they've started doing is collecting the jackfruit, processing it, and bringing it to market in some way, selling it through to markets for value addition, processing, etc. But this is not a solved problem. A lot of these things are difficult. These value chains are difficult to access, and the quality of produce that you get at exactly the right time, especially for a company like yours, which takes a lot of effort and pride in the way that you process the ingredient. Could you speak a little bit to what the challenges are of integrating backwards into supply chain? So if people are listening on this call that are interested in getting in touch with you about whole plant-based ingredients, whether they're jackfruit or other things, and think through how they're building up their value chains.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to address that elephant in the room, I guess, speaking to a largely Indian audience, I mean, obviously we know that India is the largest producer of jackfruit, and we certainly have looked and will continue to look at sourcing from India. And I'm confident that in the future we will be. But we've started with Sri Lanka for a number of reasons. One was around the specific maturity we were looking for. We just found it easier. The farmers that we built a network with there had a very, very good understanding around that specific maturity, which was easy for us to build. Sri Lanka is a a relatively small country compared to India, with a fairly well set up road system and infrastructure to transport things around. The jackfruit season moves around in Sri Lanka, so we can manage seasonality. And then finally, an added benefit for our initial products is that we source from, so jackfruit is often grown as a shade crop in Sri Lanka on tea and spice plantations, many of whom are already exporting to markets in the West and have organic certifications and things like that. And so we built a fully organic supply chain in Sri Lanka, piggybacking off the organic certification that they've already got for tea and spice. So that has also been an added benefit for us. Of course, we will look at India in the future and already are having some active conversations there, and as you know. So, to the questions around difficulties, I mean, jackfruit is largely grown by smallholder farmers. So there are, of course, difficulties with aggregating that and building out the supply chain network, and ensuring, good quality, as with any agricultural material, we have to deal with seasonality and things like that as well. So, that is a challenge, and it's something that we've invested heavily in and spent a lot of time doing. So, something like soy or pea or wheat, these are commodity crops that are grown at vast scale, usually by corporate farms and farmers. And so it's much easier to just go to the open market and buy that. Jackfruit, you really do have to build that supply chain. So that's an added challenge, and it's not just with jackfruit; it's with the other ingredients that we want to bring on. But to the same extent, we're a mission-driven company, and we're sustainably focused, and this isn't our primary focus, but we need to address some of the biodiversity issues in our planet as well. 12 crops make up 75% of what we eat, and they are often grown in monocrop scenarios that lead to soil degradation and other sustainability issues. And so, being able to promote biodiversity and utilize crops like jackfruit, where up to 60% of the crop is wasted, to broaden and diversify what people are eating, it's really exciting. So those are some of my comments on the supply chain. Did I answer what you're looking for there? I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it as well.
No, you definitely did. I think let's switch now to the other end of that value chain of your product. There are a lot of questions coming in about how you actually supply and how you distribute actually. So I know that you've done some B2C approaches, Blair, but could you speak a little bit about your general distribution strategy and how chefs and QSR and restaurants have played a lot into it? And I think there may be some conversations that you may want to take offline as well from the Q&A, that we can put people in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think we're following a fairly well-trodden path in the plant-based space. That being said, obviously everything's a little bit up in the air at the moment with COVID and how that is changing business models and changing behavior. But for us, we are focused initially on food service and B2B, and putting our products on restaurant menus, potentially more and more delivery menus now. So, as a way to really both grow consumer awareness and acceptance and leverage the ambassadorship of chefs, but also to give consumers a great first experience, because we trust the chefs to be able to deliver that. So for us, that's been the first place. But of course, we will look to retail channels as well, particularly with our ready-to-eat and ready-to-cook products, our dumplings and baos. So that's our focus. I mean, it's a pretty traditional model. We're working with a distributor here in Singapore, and we haven't actually launched our products yet. We're kind of in our scale-up phase right now of our manufacturing, and we will be launching imminently But you know, that you know, we are already working with a distributor here who is helping us manage that whole process. It's a joint effort on sales and so on. So you know, I don't think there's anything there that's revolutionary or new, or that most of the other plant-based companies aren't already doing as well.
And so when you are in fact supplying through to food service, are you sending base ingredients and then the chef decides what they want to do with it?
Yeah, so we, yes, exactly. So we, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, maybe sorry if that wasn't clear, we develop the pork, so that's in a shred and mince form, that we will sell to food service for chefs to create whatever they want. So if you see this photo here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but like this dish in the middle or this dish here, that's just, these are just made with the shreds. And you know, chefs can be creative and make a variety of dishes. So we will also then launch the ready-to-eat products, or ready-to-cook products rather, the dumplings and baos, both in a food service and in a consumer. So from a food service perspective, it's a slightly different profile. So you're talking more high volume establishments that want those ready-to-cook, easy solutions. Because you know, making dumplings and baos is fairly labor-intensive and time-consuming. So a lot of high volume establishments, they aren't doing that anymore. So they're looking for convenient solutions. You talk about, you know, big events or just fast food chains and so on. So, you know, it really depends on which restaurants and segment of the market we're addressing as to what products we will be selling to them.
And you mentioned momos. I mean, I think that is an incredibly exciting product to think about in India, Blair, because especially in the north of India, the things like now packaged momos, frozen momos are doing really, really well.
Yeah.
I think you knew that already. Okay. I think there are a few other questions that are coming through in terms of, once again, the kind of processing, which I think we'll leave it there. I think we'd love for you to have more one-to-one conversations with people that are interested in talking to you about sourcing, manufacturing, and distributing your products, at least in India. But let's take it then beyond Jackfruit to the next products that you're thinking of. And what can you reveal about I presume the philosophy is going to be the same because there is a position that you're occupying in the market. And what kinds of things are you thinking of?
Yeah, so I don't want to name the specific ingredients, sorry, but very similar philosophy. So it's looking for ingredients that have a natural meatiness to them, whether that be on, you know, on texture, mouthfeel, look, and so on. And then seeing how we can elevate and improve those and enhance them, and also build the supply chains and the processing capabilities and everything. So when we're looking at that, you know, there are obviously a number of filters that we look through. Firstly, we need to ensure that ingredients are scalable, because at the end of the day, you know, we want to grow our business, and there are some really, really interesting ingredients out there that unfortunately are just not that scalable for reasons, you know, some mushroom varietals, for example, they just don't do well in cultivation. Trying to scale those can be difficult. So we do look at scalability. We also consider sustainability because we are a sustainability-driven company. So how sustainable are those ingredients? Can we build a sustainable supply chain? And then, you know, there are, you know, elements of novelty and so on that we also consider. And then beyond that, I mean, as a company, we'll look, okay, well, we obviously have pork now. What are some adjacent categories we can go into? So chicken, for example. And then, okay, well, what ingredients might work as a chicken replacement? So for us, it's really about broadening our product offering and broadening the kind of the meat platform that we have as we build out additional ingredients.
Presumably the technology that you've created or the proprietary processes that you've created, they may scale across different ingredient types. Is that part of what the secret sauce is with KARANA?
There is an element of that. Obviously, each ingredient is unique. So I wouldn't say it's going to be a one-to-one, but having gone through the process with Jackfruit now, we hope that we can apply many of the learnings there and many of the insights to other ingredients to accelerate that and really start to build, a database and an understanding of, okay, well, this works with this kind of structure of ingredient, plug and play, and then, really be able to hasten that product development timeline. But we are dealing with natural ingredients that have their own unique characteristics. Of course, things will need to be tweaked and changed.
And you just announced the close of a $1.7 million round. But obviously the rule for any entrepreneur is always be raising. That's kind of that is kind of the rule for an entrepreneur. There's a lot of pressure in terms of the amount of money that's left in your bank account. It's perhaps even more, it keeps you up at night more than perhaps the size of the equity stake that you've given up or whatever. So do you have any further plans for fundraising? We do get a lot of investors that are talking to us about interesting companies pan-Asia because the Indian ecosystem is still picking up. So do you have anything to convey on that?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, always fundraising. I mean, it never stops. We're obviously not immediately looking to do another raise right now because we just closed, but we are open to starting discussions and meeting people and building those relationships. We will go and raise a Series A, likely in about a year's time, on the back of having hit some milestones and traction that we need to achieve to do that. But certainly already starting to build those relationships. And one of our advisors is a Silicon Valley veteran who has done it all, been startup to VC to board advisor and everything. So one thing he always rubs in is you never stop fundraising, and the minute you close, you should be out talking to investors about your next round already. Already having some very early discussions around that, and if there's anyone on this call or otherwise that is interested, I'm happy to have a discussion, but there are no specifics of the round yet, nothing really to share other than starting to build a relationship.
Blair, you've always been something of a cross-cultural, cross-continental person, right? And so has Dan, your co-founder. Could you speak a little bit to whether this, what are the advantages and disadvantages in terms of being able to access funding or talent or knowledge sharing or even different markets by having, one foot culturally and family-wise perhaps in different continents? Because this is something that is important for Indian entrepreneurs as well. One of the things that we definitely focus on in the GFI India team is building these corridors among these different markets, because we think it's going to be much easier for Indian entrepreneurs who are plugged into what's happening overseas to access funding, knowledge, talent, etc., and immediately bring them into the Indian landscape.
Yeah, I would say there's more pros than cons. Having spent some time in the Silicon Valley ecosystem was hugely beneficial for me. In terms of just the network of people that I was able to build out and reach out to. A number of the investors that came into our round were through that network that I had built. My advice to any budding entrepreneurs is always network, and follow up on any contacts you make, because you never know what introduction someone might be able to give you or anything like that. So yes, it's definitely beneficial from a fundraising perspective, and also just a knowledge and awareness perspective, being able to learn about what other companies are doing and how they've approached problems. And look, at the end of the day, obviously it's starting to change a little bit, but a lot of the founders and companies in this space are truly mission driven and look to help each other out. And I hope that doesn't go away and continues to stay. Of course, with the success of Beyond Meat and Impossible and so on, you are getting more opportunists coming in, and that's fine. if all a rising tide lifts all boats, but it is a nice and special thing I think about this space is that people generally want other companies to do well as well. There are competitive dynamics, but I want the whole industry to succeed, and that's really nice. Beyond fundraising, attraction of talent, I don't think it makes a huge difference for us at this stage. Maybe in the future. I mean, I think it's similar to fundraising. If you have a wider network, you never know who might be able to give you an introduction to someone if you're looking for a specific skill set or something like that. So I'm sure it will be. It just hasn't played out as much yet. So yeah, definitely encourage people to look beyond their borders and look at building those networks and relationships. Do things like attending the Good Food Conference in San Francisco. Obviously not possible in this current global environment, but as and when that can happen. I mean, I understand, a trip to San Francisco can be daunting and expensive, particularly for entrepreneurs, but there is a lot of benefit to that. And I hope that GFI can be able to facilitate some of that sort of more, those connections more virtually and so on, or bringing people out to India as well. I think that would be always be great. So yeah.
And Dan spoke at the Future of Protein Summit, as you know, of course, Blair, but for everyone else that didn't know, Dan, Blair's co-founder at KARANA, spoke at the Future of Protein Summit on November 11th last year in New Delhi. We do have our Smart Protein Summit, which is what we're rebranding. This is the first time I'm announcing it. We're rebranding to the Smart Protein Summit, and it's going to be in the second week of October. So there'll be news about that pretty soon. And it's, of course, going to be virtual this year, which we think is very interesting and exciting. Blair, you mentioned talent is a numbers game. It's about networking. This stuff is hard. Could you tell us a little bit about how you access great talent to help you grow companies? Because that is make or break in terms of the types of people that you can get in and the culture that you can build as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we're still a small team. We're only 4 people, and we've been very lucky to hire two really great people into our team. But the proof will be in the pudding as we continue to grow the team if we're able to execute on that. But I think one piece of advice that I was given was to not compromise just to get someone in the door. And I think that's really important. I think you have to, even if it takes a little bit longer, and it's a really hard pill to swallow as an entrepreneur because you have so much going on and you need someone right now, but it can do so much damage to your organization and your culture and set you backwards if you hire someone just for the sake of getting a bum in the seat and it's not someone who's a right fit, who doesn't fit in with your culture and your mission and your environment or the skill set. So that is a challenge. And I would say I would be lying if I was to say that it hasn't been an extra challenge here, where there is a lot of fantastic talent, but slightly more risk-adverse talent than, say, what you experience in somewhere like Silicon Valley, where people are a lot more willing to take a punt on a seed stage or early stage startup. I'm hoping that now, having raised some money and got some great media coverage, that that will sort of change some of those discussions. But it does take a lot of work and time, and it's, as a founder, sometimes it can seem like a huge time suck recruiting, but it's so important to the success of your company that it is worth investing that time.
And then for you is, how are you thinking about, I know we've talked about this a little bit in terms of distribution, but could you speak specifically about go-to-market? So things like focus grouping, things like pricing strategy. And I think we've talked a lot in the past about the cost of the product relative to some of the Western products, which is a huge advantage in terms of price point. But how are you thinking about testing those things and getting the consumer data in? And I know you've done a lot of that already, so could you speak to that as well?
Yeah, so I mean, well-trodden path. Speak similar to what I said before. Speak to as many people as you can and get as much insight as you can. But I mean, it's a combination of using market data that's out there from Mintel, GFI, whoever it might be. But then also you have to get out yourself, and we've done consumer surveys, focus groups. So we launched a beta product last year. It's a very, very basic product. It hadn't gone through our proprietary process. We only did a little bit of work with a processor around, the traditional way Jackfruit was processed, and just a couple of minor tweaks to bring a product to market here in Singapore that enabled us to get in front of chefs, partner with, we partnered with about 12 restaurants, see how they're using the product and what they thought was lacking that, fed into our product development, and get a lot of feedback from them. So it's enabled us to design a product that's, best suited for what the chefs wanted and are looking for, but also really start to understand, how they see the market, how they think about pricing, et cetera, et cetera. So, testing is always a great way. And it's obviously when you look into tech startups and everything, they're always, just, iterate and test and put out stuff. And it's a lot harder to do when you're doing physical product. You've got to have inventories and all that kind of stuff. But there is, I still do see some benefit in an MVP kind of type product. Obviously with food, it's still got to be good enough that it's, not going to completely kill your brand or anything. So, that also helped a lot, the insights we got from that. And yeah, I mean, really just being willing to ask questions and, do a mixture of quantitative and qualitative consumer studies, and ask around people, hey, do you have any market data on this? Go on chat forums, go to a lot of the conferences, you pick up a lot of information there. So yeah, I mean, that's really how we've gone about building the consumer insights in the plan. And I would say we still feel like we don't have enough data. We could always use more. So that's, consumer insights is something we're continually looking at now that we've raised some money, something we can actually start to invest a little bit more in.
Super cool. All right. Maybe I'll ask you a last question. I'll cheat a little bit and ask you a last question. This is something that we ask on our podcast a lot, because the name of the podcast is Feeding 10 Billion by the year 2050, of course, being the implication of feeding 10 billion. So what do you think, Blair, your day will look like in 2050, and how will we be eating or feeding the world in 2050?
Yeah, good question. So I think 2050, what's that? 30 years from now. So I genuinely believe that we will be a globally plant or alternative protein, alternative meat forward society globally. I think 80% of what people are eating will be plant-based, because I think technological solutions like cell-based meat will have come to market, plant-based foods will have evolved, and I don't see it as a one or the other. I think there is space for both of them in the market, just like I think there's space for Impossible Food and a more whole plant proposition like ours. And I do think that meat will be a luxury that is enjoyed by few and hopefully very expensive. I would love for it to not exist, but I think as a realist, I think by 2050, there will still be some people eating meat. But I do see that it's necessary that we change the way we eat if we as a planet are to survive. I mean, the way the world's population is growing, we don't have enough land to feed them if we don't. So it's an imperative. And I also just think consumers' mindsets are changing to the extent that if you can give them products that are easily accessible, that are at the right price point, that taste good, they will change their behavior, because it really becomes a no-brainer at that point. And right now we're still not there, but we're at the tipping point. You know, products are becoming more accessible, prices are coming down, and the quality is improving massively. I mean, as someone who has been a vegetarian for a long time and a vegan for nearly 4 years now, you know, we're a world away from where we were 10 years ago in terms of the quality of the products.
Absolutely. It is very exciting. I want to say thank you so much, Blair, for joining us today. This has been fascinating as always. Really love the approach that you're taking at KARANA, which is quite diverse from many of the other players in the